Hi everyone, I'm Gabriel Pereira. I am your host of A Modern Animal. In this podcast, myself and my friend Dr. Mike Woodrow will be digging into all things related to the life of a modern animal. Cats, dogs, horses, and the occasional fish, we will cover it all, building on Mike's more than 35 years of experience as a veterinary surgeon in Australian country practice, suburban practice, and more recently as the owner of businesses across the pet care space. Hey everyone, I'm Gabe Pereira and welcome back to another episode of A Modern Animal. With me, of course, the inimitable, the gorgeous Dr. Michael Woodrow.
Michael,
welcome.
One of those words I can spell and one of them I can't. Great to be back.
Today, we're incredibly fortunate to have with us one of Australia's, I'd probably say even, I dare to say, one of the world's top animal behaviourists, Glenn Cooke. Glenn, welcome.
Welcome. That's incredibly generous intro. Thank you.
Glenn, if you'll permit me, and if our listeners will permit me, I've printed off your bio just because it is rather expensive. So, Glenn, I know, and behind the scenes, Glenn is the partner of Cooke, who was the incredible animal naturopath that we had on a couple of episodes ago. So, Glenn, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Narelle, for introducing us to Glenn. So, Glenn, it says here that you've been successfully training people and their dogs, and I think that's a critical point, for more than 28 years. Mm-hmm. And I know you've just finished a whole body of work, I think, with was it police dogs? Am I getting that right?
So I just finished a 2-week stint with a company called Red Team, where they work with government agencies on teaching the canine unit homemade explosives. So my expertise in that is working with the dogs. So there's a team of 3. One of the gentlemen, Andrew Coe, is a major in the Army. He's also has a chemistry background. The other gentleman, his name is Quentin. He's a warrant officer, and he's also been a bomb technician. So he has expertise of field, and my expertise was in the dog work. So we combined together to come together, and it's a whole education package, and it's just there's nothing like it. It's absolutely brilliant, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be included in that team and be a part of that educational for our armed forces and our government agencies.
Amazing. And you're active at a national level from an association point of view. You also own and manage pet resorts. You told me at the outset of the call you're involved in multiple species between dogs and cats as well.
Sorry, I don't own it. I just better put that caveat in there. I'm the general manager.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Where did you get your start with animals? I mean, you've obviously got an incredible passion and now a level of expertise that's probably, as we said earlier, world class. How did you get your start?
Long story short, I've always been extremely fascinated with dogs. It was my Uncle Lee who introduced me to dogs. He had a Weimaraner, and he was very actively involved in hunting and shooting and hunting and fishing. And he took me away with him, and I was watching his dog work in the field with him. And I just couldn't believe that this animal, like if we went rabbit shooting or something like that, that this dog would go running off into the bush, sit there for, tens of minutes at a time, find the rabbit and then bring it back to him delicately and then place it at his feet. And I used to say to him, how did you do that? And he used to laugh and said, it's magic. A little kid at the time. But as I got older, he kind of revealed what he was doing. And it was that really intrigued me. And I as I said, I've always had a kinship to dogs. Funnily enough, I was born in the year of the dog. And,
there you go.
It was something, it was a calling. It was just every other job that I've been involved in. I've been an electrician, and I've worked in sales, and I've worked in private law enforcement myself.
Yep.
But it was always the dogs that kept calling me. And it wasn't until I got a dog called Harley, who was a Rottweiler cross. And I was then enrolled in a group called Australian Dog Training, where I met my original first mentor, a guy called Boyd Hooper, who originally introduced me to private law enforcement, working dogs, and also obedience, socialization. But then not only that, we really got deep into the weeds of behavioral sciences. And It was also then that he was the originator of an organisation called the National Dog Trainers Federation, which has expanded exponentially and changed hands since then. But I'm still involved with them today. But it's just been an incredible journey of starting with the love and the joy of owning an incredible dog who really did turn out to be an amazing dog, and leapfrogging into so many different career opportunities and so many introductions with some amazing mentors and coaches in the industry.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to be flagrantly using this podcast because I've got a Hungarian Vizsla who does not have behavioural issues but has anxiety and to be honest, I'm the problem. So we true story. So we got back from years overseas with her, and then just found that as she got a little bit older, her behavioural patterns were starting to erode a little bit. Not her commands so much, but just she was getting a bit weird, particularly anxiety. And so we went and saw I think she's a Dutch dog trainer here in Sydney. And it was funny because, as you said, it's actually more about the person than it is the dog sometimes. And so her first port of call was me. Mm-hmm. So my partner's, got it down pat. She's fine. She's very organized. She's very disciplined. And she said, essentially, Gable, you've broken, in inverted commas, the pack dynamic with this dog. Mm-hmm. You're giving her, and I always remember the words she said, you're giving her a huge amount of love, but very little leadership. Mm-hmm. What's your response to that? Like, I mean, and I don't think I'm alone, Mike, in that dynamic with the dog. Like, for me, the dog's another kid, right? So, and probably, to be honest with you, gets lavished with more love and affection than the kids do sometimes. And it's very difficult for me personally to then, so one example is you're leaving the dog park. Don't wait for her to figure out what's happening. Just go. Mm-hmm. was one of the instructions from this particular lady. Yeah, I'd love your perspective on that.
There's so many compounds that result in how a dog turns out, and it can be. So I'm just going to introduce a little concept that is very important for people to understand. And I think it was way back in the 50s, 60s, where a dynamic team of Dr. John Paul Scott and John Fuller did a lot of extensive research on the critical period of socialization. Yep. And it was specifically Dr. John Paul Scott who founded the critical period of development, which is the window of, let's arguably say, 6 to 16 weeks. And some people say it even extends slightly beyond that, but we'll say 6 to 16 weeks. So if in that period of time, the dog isn't introduced to a correct social environment, and what I mean by that is introduced to people, introduced to all of the world's offering of stimuli correctly done and appropriately done, and even introduced to appropriate levels of stresses, which is very important when you research the works of Dr. Robert Sapolsky and many other behaviourists who have been involved in the neurological development of puppies and how they should function soundly. They come to an understanding that if you don't introduce your puppies to adequate levels of stress during their development, it creates a long-term problem for them, a problem that they'll never adapt from. That can be one issue. That can be one thing that creates a problematic behavioural outcome for dogs. The other outcome is, as suggested by the person that you consulted with you, and was this a lady in the Shire? Is it the same?
No, Northern Beaches.
Northern Beaches, okay. So
I'm taking notes, by the way.
Great, terrific.
As am I.
So if we're talking about just the behaviour of a dog is very much like a whiteboard to begin with, a blank whiteboard. Okay. It naturally starts its life off doing the things that a puppy or a dog would do. So until you start entering information and coordinates and data of what you want the dog to do and how the dog is to fit into your lifestyle, the dog will buck against that because
Can I interject with a quick question? Don't lose your train of thought.
Yeah.
I'm trying to apply a modern animal context to this, right? So many of us now don't necessarily interact directly with breeders. We might get our dogs on Gumtree, or we might get it from a shelter, or we may get it from a breeder. But in our case with Willow, the Hungarian Vizsla, she came across to us on a flight from the breeder at 12 weeks, I want to say.
Mhm.
So pretty young.
Often be 12 weeks, wouldn't it?
Yeah, pretty young. How relevant is that? To your point earlier, how relevant is that socialization process within their infancy, I guess?
That's a great question. A really good one, because that can have an impact on the overall social. Yeah, it can, because if the dog is very insular during that time and hasn't really had a lot of exposure, and then suddenly going into a home where maybe the person that you got the dog didn't really educate you on what your requirements are going forward as a handler and owner of that dog and a partner with that dog and its relationship. And that happens extensively. I mean,
so I reckon, and this is interesting, I reckon you'd agree with me, Mike and Glenn. They let us have kids with no license, right? And if you put my hand right up really as high as I can, as a new parent, I had no freaking idea what I was doing, right? And I think the same can be said for dogs, right? Unless you had, as you did, the great fortune of growing up with a mentor who was an animal specialist in some ways. Most people don't have a clue when they get a new puppy what the heck to do. I mean, they go to the pet store, they maybe talk to their vet, Mike, a little. But yeah, I mean, most of us are operating without a license.
Well, that's fundamentally correct, because who really tells us? And I mean, and let me cast back into when I first got involved in it, which was late 80s, early 90s. We didn't have this luxury of having the internet where we could Zoom calls, or we could access, the thesauruses of the world in moments. We had to actually get off our bums and walk and go to libraries or buy books, which is what I was doing in those early days. Like, I didn't have that initial introduction to great mentors. I actually had to do some legwork myself and speak to people and, go to clubs and talk to people about it and do a little homework before I actually got that dog. So I was very fortunate to be, even my mother at that time, she used to say to me, if you're going to go off and get a puppy, you owe it to that pup to give it its best outcome in its life. So you need to really know what you're getting involved in and understand, the breed and the requirements of the dog, the diet and so forth. And I took that on board, and I listened to what she said, and I really went on a investigatory journey of trying to find out what it was that I could do to really enhance the lifestyle of that dog. And some people just aren't that fortunate. They don't know that. They don't understand that when you get a dog, there's a foundation that needs to be set up. No one really explains that to them. It is getting much better these days, and there is a plethora of information. If people take 5 minutes to go looking for it, a lot is correct and a lot is not. A lot is very misleading when people start to look at it. So people should take their time, and what they also should do is not impulsively rush off just to find somebody who's charismatic and entertaining. There's a lot of people on social media these days who are, they're attractive. They
look the part. Yeah,
they look the part. They're entertainers rather than they are behaviorists and trainers. So they have a very much an entertaining background. And some of those people actually get it very right. Like, they have done their homework right. And not only are they entertaining, but they also are very profound in what they know. I've listened to some of them. I've thought, wow, not only are they accurate in what they're saying, but I'm actually picking up some interesting
new information. Got it.
Yeah. So I pick up some interesting hooks here and there from what they're saying. And I even include it in some of the information I pass on. So that's very important. And leading back to your original question, when we start getting involved in the foundations of how to set up a dog and how to include it in the lifestyle of a new human household, dogs don't understand that to begin with. So when I see a lot of clients and they say to me, my dog's been really badly behaved, and I said, it's not badly behaving, it's just behaving. It's doing what it understands. So it doesn't understand yet to behave in a direction that you want. It just understands, I'm a dog, and this is the genetic hardwiring that's been given to me in my breed and species that make up the calling of what I should do and how I should do it. So until time where that dog has gone through a process of learning how to do something and then transitioning into proofing on what it should do in later adulthood or later experiences, it won't do them because it doesn't understand it yet. And it would be like me putting a piano in front of you and saying, now play.
Yeah.
Don't do it. And then I scold you and saying, you're being very badly behaved. You're not playing.
Why can't you play?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So instead of giving you the opportunity to learn incrementally through stages, which is a course that it's not a course, it's a process that I remind people, which I call it a metric system of millimeter, centimeter, and then meter. And it progresses on from, you have to do the little steps, the little incremental paces to remember that you're dealing with a very juvenile brain. So dogs have the brain set of around about a 3-year-old for the rest of life. Where we have this expansive cognition, where we have a lot of the ability of deductive reasoning. Dogs have they do have it, but they're limited in what they do.
But they're operating at a toddler level, effectively, aren't they? A human toddler level, and that's at a fully grown dog phase. So
again, to reach back into what I originally said during my opening and talking about scent work, like if you were to compare the olfactory system of a dog to the way that we think, it's a crossover effect. Like they smell the way we think. So their ability to detect and their ability to understand odor and comprehensive and detailed and, even down to very, very small molecular levels, they can process it in such a fashion that is alien to us.
Got it.
Our deductive reasoning, our ability to reach into the universe, to think of ourselves and be very self-aware, and also to, invent things like
conceptual reasoning as well, right? The dogs obviously don't have that.
Well, they can't do any of this. So, like computers and all the things that we take for granted on a daily basis that we used to wow at a long time ago, but now kind of look at it and go, oh, it's redundant already.
Yeah.
Dogs, to them, this is alien technology.
Yeah, yeah.
So if we understand that, then we can give them a bit of a break and say to them, it's not fair that I put so much responsibility on you when I really haven't taken the time to teach you how to do it right and incrementally do it and set you up on a daily basis, not only to show you how to do it, but also how to win the game. Yep. And, fundamentally, I think
that's interesting.
Well, that's a saying that I say to a lot of people is teach your dog what's the game and how do I win it?
Okay, so I'm gonna dig in. I'm gonna double click on that, but I wanted to go back. So we've got a whole raft of questions which I want to try and get to. I know we're conscious of time. Let's do two things. Let's do a scenario. So scenario one, you get an owner, just as they've bought their new puppy or they've just brought in a rescue. But the rescue, let's assume the rescue's not psychologically damaged too much. Mm-hmm. They've got all the money and the time in the world, and they've got a desperate interest in being the best dog parent, best pup parent they can be. Mm-hmm. What do you tell them? What process do you follow? That's best case. Obviously, no one's going to be in best case, but
there's a myriad of things that's on offer there. First of all, this is where Dr. Mike would come into context, because I generally go and say, get your dog checked out by your vet. Make sure that they give them a clean bill of health. They check, they may do some bloods. They make sure their vaccinations are up to date. They check their joints, check their development.
That's interesting, because I think, and it's interesting because we had another vet on last time, Mike, Dr. Matt Muir, who said, in an ideal situation, sorry to interrupt you, Glenn, come to me as your veterinarian long before you have any problems.
Yeah.
So you're saying essentially the same thing.
Well, I suggest that the dog learns who the vet is and has a relationship with them, rather than go to them for something adverse and have a negative experience. They go to their vets, and vets are getting much better these days with behavioural knowledge with dogs. Like, rather than reef them up onto the table like they would in the old days and just give them a shot or stick something on their bum, they now, like, spend some time. They give them some liver treats. They get to know the client. They get to know the dog, and they're becoming more behaviourally aware as they're going on as well. So, they're actually getting involved in teaching their staff about behaviour and enrolling in behavioural understandings. Like, even there's been times where I've been teaching a lot of vets and vet nurses over the longevity of my 3 decades in the experience, which is, it's great. We're actually reaching out and having a collaborative network together. So I think that's really important that
so see your vet first. You've got a new puppy, see your vet first, get a baseline.
Yeah, well, Dr. Mike, how important do you think that is?
Yeah, absolutely important. And what I've noticed is that I think the industry is actually getting on board, and what we're seeing is new generations of vets who come through. I think the profession is populated by people who have a passion for pets, but it's very easy to become clinically distracted. And in fact, the more toys we get in our practice, the higher the risk. But I think we're coming through a full circle and say, actually, what really matters is let's start with the pet and with the pet human bond as the foundation. So Glenn, I think you're absolutely spot on.
Mm. So from the vet side of things, in leading into developing the relationship with the vet, we also have a relationship with food, correct feeding of the dog as well. And this is, why I'm so incredibly fortunate to be married to Narelle, because she's taken me down an incredible path of supplement and feeding. And, a lot of the problems that we've had with our own dogs, especially Randy, our working line German Shepherd, he had a lot of ear issues until we switched diet. And he still has them occasionally. We've just had a abhorrent weather lately where it's just been nonstop rain and humidity
and all the rest of it. Yep.
Yeah. And because he's a hairy, black colored dog with thick, bushy mane around his ears and everything like that, he really suffers in that hot weather. So prior to that, it was all the time, he had ear problems all the time. Now it's sparingly, because his diet is much better. He's fitter, and trust me, he doesn't need any more energy. He's like the Tasmanian devil.
Yep.
So, but the relationship with food is very important, as it is with us. We so often think about the things that we need to eat. And Julian, Gabriel, you're a supplement person as well.
That's right.
That's part of your industry, and you and Narelle are collaborative on that. You've been talking together and liaising with each other over things like that. So you get it, and so does Dr. Mike. You all get it. Understand.
So what's let's be controversial for a second. Again, money's no object. What's the optimal diet? Are you advocating raw?
We are. We are advocating raw, and if we're advocating any type of a kibble, we're advocating a sensible type of a kibble where it's more aligned to a better processed kibble. And also correct supplementation as well. So sometimes there are things that dogs are not getting in a natural diet that we need to supplement. The same thing that we do. I supplement every day. Narelle has on a supplement regime all the time for stress, and it's just that dealing with the job that I have to do, and
totally.
These are very important things. So we're very considerate of that, but then we have to think of the dogs as well. If we're going to do it, why aren't we thinking about our cats and dogs in that same sort of sense? And even captive birds, the importance of captive birds in not just eating a bland diet, but actually having an enriched diet where they're actually getting
more nutrition.
Nutritional foods. So, the relationship with the vet, having adequate diet, and then also the importance, as I said before, about having a proper social outcome with the dog, and having an integral obedience routine with the dog, but not so much. Let's not talk about it so much as obedience, but more so as behavior, the understanding and the network of behavior. So, in order for a dog to live its best life, there is, it's kind of like the holy trinity of health is, proper veterinary care and making sure that everything is sound on that part, proper diet and nutrition, and then adequate education. I think that summarizes nicely what I think is considerable for a healthy overall dog.
So you've taken thank you. From what I'm hearing you say, you've taken as assumed unlimited love, cuddles, kisses, hugs from the family.
I actually think that love and affection and play, especially play,
is critical, right?
Is critical. I mean, if you look at some of the science or the data that comes back, which we're always learning about and being re-informed about new things that science is finding out, and especially since the invention of fMRIs, we've been able to map how a dog's brain reacts to certain forms of stimuli. Yeah. We can see things now, we can see regions of the brain. Whereas when I was younger, we were told that, dogs are fundamentally just, they're
working machines.
Well, they're beasts of burden, basically. They just do what they're told. And, if they don't, you knock them into conformity. But they're very much thinking, feeling, loving animals. You know, they're part of an integral species relationship that we have. So we need to understand them better, and we need to make sure in order for them to learn, the environment has to be sound. It's the same thing for us. A stressful environment means that you will be receptive to more stress and less learning, where an environment which is enriched and loving and kind and compassionate and thoughtful will be one that allows that dog to really learn and really take on the message that you're trying to deliver. So
I love that, man. I think that's absolutely beautiful.
It is, and please, you know, like I love and talk to and kiss my dogs. I know that they don't understand the origins of the language and so forth, but they understand the compassion that's coming from it. You know, and I think that if you're involved in having a pet in your lifestyle, rather than just having a dog that turns dog food into dog poo, you should have something that, you know, is part of your active life.
It's a relationship. It's a real relationship.
It's absolutely a relationship.
Yeah. And our pets are primarily empaths. I mean, they,
exactly.
And so, you know, oftentimes as I'm putting my dogs to bed at night, you know, I'm going to close the doors, lock the doors, you know, turn off the lights and put the dogs to bed. And, you know, often as I'm kind of walking out of the room, I just stop and just, you know, kneel down and just say, you're good, you know, like,
love it.
You done good today. And the thing is, you know, like, who gets the most out of that? Because I got to say, I get a fair bit out of that.
I was going to say the feedback that we actually get for having pets in our lives, I just don't think we take the time sometimes to realize how lucky we are.
No. But you study the ancestral sort of patterns. Sorry, I'm going way off piste here for a second. There is a school of science that says our human microbiome has evolved in concert almost, or in lockstep with our interactions with animals, in particular dogs, as we've gone along through history. Incredible,
well, that's right? Yeah, it is incredible. I mean, the science that we actually find out of the benefits of mental health and physical health that an animal brings us, you know, having that symbiotic relationship with them in our lives. Gabriel, one point I did want to talk about before when we were talking about the aspects of learning was that there's science that is a proven fact that if you incorporate play into learning, then the retention is upwards of 80%. So that's one of the things that we definitely do encourage when you're talking about cuddles and kisses and play.
Yeah,
play is definitely very important. Like there's a lot of times, even when I'm working with some of these government agency people where they think, you know, I've had people suggest to me that maybe these dogs don't have the best lifestyle, where I can attest that they have a wonderful lifestyle.
Is that right? Interesting.
The men and women that are involved in this, they feel extremely
there's a real bond,
important. They love what they do, and they love those dogs so much. And, you know, even though those dogs are in high risk situations, they are incredibly bound to that dog, and in such a way where you watch the relationship between them and the pride of seeing their dog working and the escalation of the dog getting better in its work. It's just it's very emotional sometimes. You look at it and you just think, wow, what a powerful scene I'm looking at.
That's good.
Love it. Okay, so I'm going to recap. So you've got the new puppy.
Yep.
Again, I think, and I'm so thrilled to hear you say these words. So one of our propositions, I guess, as whether you, as you rightly said, supplement owners or supplement brands, veterinarians, dog owners, is to enable our dogs to live their best lives, or our animals to live their best lives. So I'm so excited to hear you say those words as well. So vet care, get the diet sorted, speak to experts as you need to during that process. And then this adequate, your words, adequate education. And obviously the sort of underpinning of play and love and care, which we've just spent a bit of time discussing. Let's double click on the adequate education. What does that mean practically?
So that's something that never really ends. It's a question that people have asked me considerably throughout my career and said to me, when does it end? And
when can I stop training?
Pretty much. Yeah. And I said, well, it's not like you have to go to classes all that time. Like you don't have to continually go along to a training class or continually pay for private lessons. But the uptake of knowledge never really ends. Like your dog is learning all the time. anytime it's around you, and this is why dogs do pick up bad behaviors sometimes, is because they're watching things that you are creating in your lifestyle that you are subsequently unaware of, but you're allowing the dog to repeat those behaviors on an ongoing basis. And then when you wonder, why is the dog doing this? Like, where is this behavior coming from? Why am I seeing a repeat of this behavior on a regular basis? Well, dogs are products of their environment, and what you reward, you get more often. So reinforcement basically means that you will see an extension of that behavioral line extending into the dog's behavior. So if the dog finds anything it's doing as reinforcing, and people say, well, I didn't reinforce it. Well, it might not be intentional reinforcement, but if the dog finds it reinforcing, and it's the same thing for us, we do things that we find comfort or reinforcement in. So if we continually do it and we find it reinforcing, we're going to continue to do that behavior. So there's a lot of times where people will say to me, you know, like, why is it happening? And I say, because the dog likes it. It finds it satisfying. Yep. And, you know, like sometimes when the dog is actually initiating some form of response to something, and it gets a big dopamine dump out of it, well, it feels good. I mean, dopamine it makes you feel good when you're getting a huge cycle of it. So if the dog is cycling up on dopamine, it's going to feel good about the situation, therefore find it habitually reinforcing to keep doing the behavior over and over again. So we've got to look at that cycle and look at how do we break the cycle, and how do we create some sort of adversity around that. So the dog thinks, well, maybe I don't like it anymore. Maybe this doesn't give me the
feel as good. Yeah.
It doesn't feel as good, or I don't receive the same opportunities by doing the behavior. So it looks to create extinction of that behavior, to make the behavior reduce significantly or ultimately go away. Yep. And the way we do that is we start showing the dog, as I said before, that this behavior is adverse and it leads to, negative outcomes. Whereas if you do other behaviors and you direct the dog into the line where you want the dog to see the correct form of behavior, then the dog can see reason for doing that. And it understands that, you know, this path is a successful path. And any healthy species, and I need to put that in as a caveat there, the concept of healthy, because the unhealthy mind will often do things that you wouldn't assume would be favorable. Yep. Whereas the healthy mind will rationalize carefully of what things are positive and what aren't. Yep. So primarily that's what we want to do, is we want to teach our puppies and our dogs, whether it be something you got from a breeder or something you got through rescue or whatever, how to understand what you want and what is the objective overall, and how does the dog win in this situation. I love that. Okay. I reread a book that I read years ago called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey.
It's a classic.
And he talks about relationships of being, like the ultimate relationship is a win-win relationship, not a win-lose or a lose-lose relationship. Like you're always looking into, in order for you to win, it makes me win. And that's what we need to work with our dogs, is we need to very much cycle ourselves in the concept of a win-win relationship. Because if the dog is doing the behavioral onsets that you want it to do, then you're winning. Yep. And then the dog learns, well, not only am I winning, not only is the person winning, but I'm winning as well.
Yep.
The dog doesn't really understand the concept of you winning. It just looks at it's kind of selfish in a way. It's kind of looking at, how do I win this all the time? And what you do is you set up this foundation where you make the dog believe it's winning by playing the game that you're constructing. Right. And how
do we do that? I guess what probably make it easier for me to understand, and probably our listeners as well, Mike, is examples like, and I know, Mike, you've got 1,000 clinical practice, but one that springs to mind is, again, my dog, apologies, I'm using this as a professional consultation. She's the most beautiful personality on the planet, but for some reason, as she's gotten older, when someone comes to the front door of the office, so she's next door to me at the moment, or the front door of our home, goes berserk, barking, her sort of deep, scary voice bark, and then runs to the door. And this is a brand new behavior. So it's no more than probably 6 months old. As I said, otherwise just a very gentle, very, very loving dog, super affectionate. And I don't get the sense that the bark is aggressive. It's more her panicked, I think. Discuss.
I'll let Dr. Mike go first. And
Yeah, good on you, Glenn. And, I think what we're going to start to open up is some of the scenarios that either we ourselves are experiencing, or our next door neighbours, or the people that we meet at barbecues, and they're saying, oh, I've got when the phone rings, or when I leave, or when I come home, or when the postman delivers, or and I suppose for me in practice, what I'm leaning on are some really basic investigative skills to say, has there been some episode of trauma or something which has been a triggering in the past, and is there a path towards desensitization where we can, in a controlled sense, set up and recreate and then role play this new game where we can set up the win, which I've just got to say. And, the message I'm hearing from you, Glenn, is this idea of commitment and intentionality, just to say they're worth it. They're even worth the inconvenience of the time. And you go, oh, really? Do I really have to do this? And you go, you know what? Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Because in the same way as I do this for my kids, I've taken on responsibility here. Yep. Glenn, over to you.
I absolutely agree with the message you're going with, and the technical term that we explain it is counter conditioning. So if the dog is conditioned to behave a certain way, and a lot of times running and barking at the door is a very rewardable behavior. Some people mislead it for the dog being anxious. And in some cases they can be. Not everything can be diagnosed with just, waving a wand and doing some behavioral tricks and then fixing the problem. Sometimes it is deep-seated, and that's when the conversation with the vet has to come into play. As in people, sometimes in occasion, you need to look at the inclusion of perhaps some form of medication to help calm the dog down. Most of the time, prior to doing that, we exhaust all the behavioral applications first. So we actually look at it as, are you conditioned to do this? When you hear the door ring, it stimulates a behavioral response from you, and then you get rewarded for doing it, because then people come to the door. Like when the door opens, it's a very much a rapid onset of things happening. So the doorbell rings, there's stimulation from that noise. Then there's people outside, which also includes odor as well. That's right. Yeah. So there's movement, there's activity, and then there's you sprinting for the door. Yeah. So that and alone is very
stimulating.
Yeah, it is very stimulating. Yeah. And there's a lot of, what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? Arousal. That's the word.
A lot of arousal triggers.
Yeah,
I think,
a lot of arousal. So while that's all going on, and while the dog is responding to that high level of arousal, like the dog's seeing you run to the door, there's people at the door, there's a lot of activity, and then the dog only has to learn to bark one time and then feel rewarded for it, like it wasn't necessarily rewarded for it, but it barked one time, opened the door up, there's all these people, everyone's patting the dog and jumping on top of it, the dog's jumping around, mayhem erupts, and the dog thinks, wow, wasn't that awesome? That was just a cocktail.
This was a good day.
That's a massive dopamine dump right away. Like as soon as the doorbell rings, the dopamine spike goes up, the dog runs out, and all that. There's a little stress involved, and there's a lot of arousal involved. But the juice is worth the squeeze for the dog in that situation. So sometimes even you're going, get down, stop it, that. But there's more hope in the behavior completing from the dog than there is in you thinking that you're reducing the behavior by, trying to take, seconds to stop this behavior, when this has taken months, maybe years to create this conditioned response.
Got it.
So what we need to do then is we need to change the way the dog thinks and feels about the sound of the bell. So and this is where a lot of people aren't willing to do it. And this is why the behavior won't go away, because unfortunately with onset behaviors where they've been conditioned over a long period of time, it also takes time to get rid of it, to create that extinction process, or to condition the dog to switch how it feels about it, or the response that it gives to the stimuli of the bell ringing. So in situations like that, what we would generally do, long story short, is we would ring the bell, or even buy the same sort of bell from Bunnings, ring it, by you sitting on the couch, have the dog realize, oh, there's nothing going on over the door, because the dog will run to the door, it'll bark. Yep. Then it will start realizing that nothing is actually happening there. So it starts to realize, and you've got to explain to visitors, and you've got to be very careful that you don't accidentally reinforce this while you're trying to do it. But you've got to do this over a period of time where you start teaching the dog the extinction of nothing happens when the doorbell goes off. The dog starts realizing, I'm not getting rewarded, nobody's at the door. But what we then start doing is ringing the doorbell and teaching the dog to, instead of running to the door, go to a place marker, like a bed like its bed, or go to its crate, or run into another room, or whatever it is, and then a high level of reinforcement followed.
So favorite treats,
good dog. Yeah. So the dog starts realizing the doorbell means something else. It doesn't mean run to the door anymore. That was my old programming. My new programming is to do the other thing that you're teaching me. So this, again, this takes time. And this is where we've got to make sure that we don't allow a mistake to happen in this, because what we can do sometimes, and what we don't really want to do, is accidentally create superstitious behaviors. Because let me tell you, when you create a superstitious behavior in your dog, that is the most strengthened and reinforced behavior that you can.
Can you explain that?
A superstitious behavior is something that creeps in, that the dog doesn't quite understand why it did it, but it feels that it was necessary. It's the same thing with us. Like when we spill salt and we throw salt over our shoulder.
Yeah.
Like some people, you say, why did you do that? And they go, oh, I don't know. My mum used to do it.
Yeah.
But they can't sort of break the habit. And you see them doing it, and you go and you look at them and you point at them and laugh, and they go, and they get angry about it, but they can't help it. It's something that their grandmother did it, their mother did it, and they did it. So it's something that they feel will keep them safe. Their mum or their grandmother told them the woo about how the devil would get in you if you didn't throw salt over your shoulder. So they feel that same way, and dogs feel that same way through certain types of behaviors. So some is learned behavior. The worst of them is superstitious behavior.
I've never heard that term before. Have you?
Yeah, Ladybug, our French bulldog, she's got a superstitious behavior of whenever she sees the lizards appear around spring and summertime, because one got in the house one day and it poked its head under the door and she caught it and killed it. She now looks behind the door every single day. And I thought the likelihood of that ever occurring again will be 1 in a million. And the next summer, a lizard appeared and she caught it and killed it again.
No.
So, seriously. And I'm sitting there and I've got sparks flying out of my ears because I'm thinking this will extinguish over a period of time. She'll learn it's never going to happen again, but it happened again, and it reinforced the superstitious behavior. So every single day she sits behind the door and stares at the door crack so
she'll wait there
for hours at a time, staring at the door, waiting for that lizard to appear, even though the likelihood of it happening now, I mean, that was 1 in 365, choose from 1 in a million, because it's happened again. It reinforced it all again. She has meaning and purpose behind that.
Yeah, of course.
So she goes back and repeats that behavior, and to try and get rid of it, let me tell you, the frustration. Superstitious behaviors are the, like you really wish that it would leap into a desirable behavior, because then they're so strong, that behavior is so well reinforced that you don't have to do a lot of ongoing work to keep the behavior up. It's perpetually reinforcing for the dog over a long period of time. But it often happens to things that you don't want. And you've got no real control over. It's just that the environment has allowed, an unfavorable onset of unfortunate events to come together to reinforce the dog. So getting back to the doorbell thing, if it's not a superstitious event, the main thing is that the dog has got to learn that the old behavior is no longer favorable, that there is a same stimuli, which is the doorbell ringing. And instead of having that classical effect, which Ivan Pavlov was very famous for with the bell and the salivation.
Salivating,
The doorbell does the same thing. It gives the dog a classical effect. It makes the dog think of the outcome of the reward. So we've got to change that. So we change that classical effect and make the dog feel emotionally different about the sound of the bell in running to its bed and then receiving response. So there's 2 types of conditioning that occur in animals, and this gets a little scientific, and if people at home are following along, if they've ever done any behavioral work at school, they've probably heard these terms. But if you haven't, it's interesting to look up. One is Pavlovian or classical. It's the same thing explained differently. It was called Pavlovian to honor Ivan Pavlov, who came up with it. That's very much in a subconscious reaction. It's a reflex behavior. So if you're stimulated by something, it brings on a feeling. It's the same way when we look at money, we're stimulated to feel what the money will do for us. So when we see money, even though it's just printed paper, that's all it is. It's just paper with printing on it. But when we see it, we can think of a myriad of things that will attract to our lives. The other type of conditioning is what's called operant or instrumental conditioning, where you're very much aware of your behavior and the outcome. So you can actually choose a line of what you'll do. So even though you say that, I mean, there's still foolish people out there who are aware that some behaviors will lead to an untimely outcome or an unfortunate or a negative outcome, but yet they'll still do the behavior anyway. And you'll think, why? But that comes back to sometimes when you're talking about the healthy mind versus the unhealthy mind. So in a operant response, you're very much in control of what happens. You sit back and summarize. If I do this, the outcome will be good. So the likelihood of me doing it again will be much greater.
Consequential thinking.
Yeah. Whereas if I do this and then, it's unfavorable or adverse, it's going to lead to something very negative happening to me. So I want to reduce the impact of that happening in my life. So these sort of things, understanding these and how this can affect the lifestyle and outcomes of the dog's relationship in the human home, it has a profound effect on the results that you'll get and how you feel about having that relationship with the dog. And in cases where people are on the edge of whether to keep the dog or not, which is a problem that I face a lot, I come into, myself and my colleagues come into full effect, is we sit there and try and help people fall in love with their dog all over again. To remember that little beautiful puppy that they had, even though that it's grown 5 times the size and it's more powerful and the drives of the dog and the instincts of the dog are kicking in, what we can do is we can show them with a little work every day, working that millimeter, centimeter, and meter prospect, you can now have a dog that understands how to speak the language, or how you can speak a language that translates into an achievable outcome with the dog.
So you can teach an old dog new tricks.
Absolutely, you can. I mean, if I can learn things every decade that I turn a decade older, I always teach myself a new thing. This decade,
I have to say, I mean, I'm not wearing a hat, you are, but if I had a hat, I'd take it off to you, man, because I think the approach you've just articulated is so beautiful.
Thank you.
And it's so animal centric, which is just phenomenal.
Glenn, just as both Gabe and I have been taking notes, but what I feel like we've been able to cover today has just been, it's been quite a foundational session, and it's covered many of the principles. And I'm just aware of time, and Gabe, I'm wondering whether perhaps we could reconvene and take it to the next level.
If Glenn's open to it, I'd be delighted. I think it'd be a privilege to have you back on, mate.
Thank you, both of you gentlemen. That's a lovely compliment. And yes, I'd love to come back and chat with you further. I think that would be wonderful. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
I feel like we've got 1/10 through our list, Mike.
And I think those foundations that you were talking about, which is let's set up to win.
That's episode 2, I reckon.
Yeah. Set up to win.
Yeah, well, let's recap on those questions, and if you've got listeners of the show who've got anything interesting that they want to share or try and deep dive into a little bit more, we can try and uncover something about that.
Thank you. And Glenn, just in the closing minutes of this call, anything you want to promote, anything you'd like us to shout out about? I know you've got your beautiful podcast as well, the Canine Paradigm.
The Canine Paradigm, which with my co-host Pat Stewart. I will put a caveat in place and just say that there is some adult language in there from time to time. We made that very clear at the start that this is a podcast for adults. So it's a very informative. We've interviewed guests all over the world, and we've also shared our ideas and gone on a collaborative journey of investigation over time, and changed our mind on the way we approach training and the concepts of what we think about. While I've got the opportunity to do a shout out as well,
please.
Shout out Pet Resorts Australia, which is the pet care facility that I work for and manage. I'm the general manager of that. We have now 8 facilities around Australia. We just we just branched into Queensland. So I actually, yeah, thank you, Dr. Mike. I left Melbourne with Narelle on a whim and a prayer to come up when we were, a very small, struggling company, and we're now 8 strong, and we're expanding, and we're really kicking some major goals. We've got a great team of just amazing, dedicated, talented young people, predominantly young ladies that are working for us that I'm so proud of. And they do such a wonderful job, and they work, we've had floods and all sorts of adverse events going on, but COVID and everything. But these girls, these young people, their dedication and their love for animals, I just can't say enough great things about them. And probably last, the training company that I also work with,
brilliant.
I'm the training director of, is Canine Evolution. Once again,
so Glenn, if you'll send us through those links to all those elements, we'll pop those in the show notes and get them out to our audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely, can do.
Thanks everyone for joining. As always, you can find all the resources that we've mentioned and some of the resources that Glenn's going to send through to us after the show in the show notes. I just wanted to thank our incredible guest, Glenn Cooke. Glenn, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Dr. Mike, as always, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.